So, what? You served coffee on base, right? Those words hit me harder than any turbulence I'd ever flown through. I set my wine glass down slowly, careful not to let my hand shake. My brother-in-law leaned back in his chair, grinning at his own joke, waiting for the table to laugh with him. And they did. Even my husband stayed quiet. I could have ended the conversation right there. One sentence. But something in me wanted to see how far he would go. So I smiled instead, and said one simple word. Try again. That single answer would change everything about how this family saw me, and by the end of that dinner, one man in that room would be forced to apologize on his knees. But to understand why, you need to go back 3 years, to the day I married into a family that never once asked what I actually did for a living. My name is Commander Elena Marsh, United States Navy. I married David 2 years ago, and from the very beginning, his family had a picture of me in their heads that had nothing to do with reality. David's father, Colonel Richard Marsh, was a retired Marine, the kind of man who filled every room with his presence before he even said a word. He talked about his service constantly, his deployments, his medals, the men he'd led. And every time I sat at that table, quiet, sipping my drink, he'd glance at me like I was furniture. David's brother, Tyler, was worse. Tyler never served a day in uniform, but he loved talking about the military like he understood it better than anyone in the room. To him, women in the Navy were nurses, admin clerks, maybe pilots of a transport plane if he was feeling generous. He never asked me directly what I did. He just assumed, and I let him assume. Because honestly, some things are classified, and some things I simply chose to keep to myself. My work training fighter pilots wasn't something I bragged about at family dinners. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. But assumptions have a way of turning into insults when nobody corrects them. And at every holiday, every birthday, every quiet family gathering, Tyler's jokes got a little sharper, a little more personal. David always laughed along or stayed silent, hoping it would blow over. It never did. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had grown used to being the punchline. Tyler would ask if I'd ever been allowed near a real jet, or joke that my uniform was probably just for parades. I let it go every single time because I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But that Thanksgiving was different. Colonel Marsh had invited half his old unit's families over, filling the house with men who had genuinely served, genuinely bled for this country. And in front of all of them, Tyler decided to make me his entertainment for the night. So, what? You served coffee on base, right? He said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. A few people chuckled awkwardly. David shifted in his seat, but said nothing. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my composure. I set my glass down and looked him dead in the eye. Try again, I said calmly. He laughed harder now, encouraged by the attention. All right. Then what did you actually do in the Navy? Filing paperwork? Answering phones? The table went quiet. Even the colonel's old war buddies were watching now, curious where this was going. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, but a kind of tired clarity. I had spent years letting this family underestimate me to keep the peace. That peace had cost me every ounce of respect I deserved. So this time I didn't hold back. What hurt most wasn't Tyler's mockery. It was David's silence. My husband, sitting right beside me, said nothing as his brother turned me into a joke at the dinner table. Not once did he speak up. Not once did he say, "Hey, that's my wife, cut it out." I looked at him, hoping for some sign of support, and all I got was an awkward smile, like he was hoping I'd just laugh it off too. That silence felt heavier than any insult Tyler threw at me. It told me that in this family, keeping the peace mattered more than defending me. Colonel Marsh, to his credit, was watching closely now. He had that sharp, assessing look military men get when something doesn't add up. He'd noticed my ribbons on the one occasion I wore my dress uniform to a formal event, but he'd never asked questions. He assumed, like his son, that I filled some quiet support role. Nobody in this family had ever bothered to actually ask me a direct question about my career. That silence, that assumption was its own kind of betrayal. Not a dramatic one. Not a cinematic one. Just years of being erased in small, quiet ways, dinner after dinner, until Tyler's public mockery became the final straw. I realized in that moment that I had a choice. I could keep swallowing it to protect everyone's comfort, or I could finally tell the truth and let the pieces fall wherever they landed. I chose the truth. I didn't need to plan some elaborate scheme. I didn't need paperwork or phone calls or outside help. My revenge, if you could even call it that, was simply going to be honesty, the one thing this family had never actually asked me for. I looked around the table at all those veterans, all those men who understood exactly what certain assignments meant, exactly what certain qualifications required. I knew that if I said the right words, in the right room, in front of the right people, Tyler's mockery would collapse under its own weight. I turned to him, still smiling, still calm. "You really want to know what I did in the Navy, Tyler?" He smirked, egging me on for the table's entertainment.
Yeah, go ahead.
"Enlighten us." I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to lean in. "I was a Top Gun instructor," I said. "Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. I trained the top 1% of fighter pilots in this country for 6 years." The table went completely silent.
Colonel Marsh set his fork down slowly.
His old war buddies exchanged glances, the kind of glances that said they understood exactly what that title meant and exactly how impossible it was to fake. One of them, a retired master sergeant, actually let out a low whistle. "You're telling me," Colonel Marsh said carefully, "that you taught air combat maneuvering to F/A-18 pilots?" "Among other things," I said. "Advanced tactics, adversary training, live intercepts. I flew as the enemy in training exercises against some of the best pilots in the fleet, and my job was to make sure they were ready for anything before they ever saw real combat." Tyler's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly searching for some way to salvage the moment. "I mean, you never told us that." "You never asked," I said simply. "You just assumed." The colonel turned to his son with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, but a deep, quiet disappointment. "Tyler," he said, his voice low and controlled in the way only a man who has commanded troops can manage, "do you have any idea what it takes to earn that role? That is one of the most demanding, most respected positions in naval aviation. Fewer people qualify for that than make it to space." Tyler's ears had gone bright red. He tried to laugh it off. "I didn't know, all right? It was just a joke." The colonel's voice sharpened, cutting through the room. "It stopped being a joke the moment you mocked her service in my house, in front of men who bled for this country. Boy, apologize.
Now."
Tyler looked around the table, realizing every single guest was staring at him, waiting. There was no laughing this one off. He turned to me, his jaw tight, his pride visibly cracking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have said any of that. I had no idea." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the problem. You never bothered to find out." The colonel wasn't finished either. He turned to his son with the same disappointment still etched across his face. "Every year, I've watched you talk about service like you understand it, and you never once thought to ask your own sister-in-law a single real question. That's not just disrespectful to her. That's disrespectful to everyone who's ever worn a uniform." David finally spoke up, guilt written all over his face. "Elena, I'm sorry too. I should have said something a long time ago. I should have defended you." "You should have," I agreed. "But you're saying it now. That matters." The dinner didn't end in shouting or storming out. It ended quietly, almost gently, with Tyler helping clear the table without being asked, and Colonel Marsh pulling me aside afterward to shake my hand like an equal, like a fellow service member, for the very first time. "I owe you a real conversation," he said. One veteran to another. "I'd like that," I told him. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly, but genuinely. Tyler started asking real questions instead of making jokes. Colonel Marsh invited me to speak with some of his old unit at a reunion, introducing me not as David's wife, but as Commander Marsh, Top Gun instructor. David made a point of speaking up whenever conversations turned dismissive, whether about me or about anyone else. I think about that dinner often not because of the apology but because of what it taught me about silence. For years, I let people underestimate me because correcting them felt exhausting, felt like more trouble than it was worth. But silence doesn't earn respect. It just delays the moment when the truth finally has to come out. You don't owe anyone a performance of your accomplishments. But you also don't have to shrink yourself just to keep the peace at someone else's table. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't shouting back. It's simply telling the truth, calmly, and letting people sit with what they assumed wrong. If you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, let this be a reminder. You don't need their permission to be exactly who you are. If this story hit home, comment Top Gun below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.